This is Excel tutorial 1 out of 16. The most important concepts that we have to understand in Excel. First, let's begin with some key concept names that we have to understand. First is the concept of the cell. Each of these selections here, this is what's known as a cell. Now, cells are comprised of two pieces of information. One is the column information. So this selection here, D, is a column. And the row information, which this is row number 3. This will become row number 2. Where the column and the rows meet, that's the cell. So for example, this is column C. This is row 2. So this becomes cell C2. So that is the name of the cell. The cell begins with the letter for the column first and the number for the row. So in the case over here, where G and 3 intersect, this will be the cell G3. That is the name of the cell, G3. Now, when we talk about another concept, it's called a range. Range is a selection of cells. So for example, from here to here, this will be a range. Or from here to here, this will be a range. A range can be comprised of there's a continuous selection of one column, or continuous selection of one row, continuous selection of rows and columns. Now, the key part about a range is a continuous selection. And a range is named in this manner: the first cell of the range and the last cell of the range, with a colon in between. So for example, let me give an example of this range that I just highlighted here. It begins with the cell H3 and ends with the cell N11. So therefore, the range name, the range would be H3 colon N11. And this is important later on because in Excel, cells and ranges are used continuously. And I'll show you later on how when it is used. Okay, so this is one example. Let me give you another example of a range. So let me delete these. So let's say I have a range this way. So I drew it backwards. However, even though you draw it backwards, always begin from the top left corner. So let me highlight this range again. Highlight top range corner here, which is a D3, and the bottom right corner, which is a F10. So therefore, the range will be D3 colon F10. So that is a range. Now, in Excel, besides the range, besides cells, there's this concept called a sheet. And this is what a sheet is. If you notice in the bottom, there's this thing called sheet number 1. And right now, we are in the sheet called concepts. And by the way, you can rename the sheets as something else. Like I like to, let's say, add another new sheet. Click on this plus, and you say sheet number 3. Because sheet 1, I renamed sheet 2 as concepts. And sheet 3, I can rename it, I don't know, any kind of name. So let's call it new sheet. Sheets are important because it becomes like a blank canvas. And let me go ahead and increase this so you can see a little bit better. And you can also control this by this zoom here. Because Excel can interact between different sheets. So I might have certain numbers in sheet number, the new sheet, that I can use it as this sheet as maybe the assumptions. And I could say something like, name of a person and the age of the person. The name, called it Ralph Nader. The age maybe 57 years old. And later on, I'm going to call upon these cells here. Now, this cell here, we know that the cell is B1. However, if I'm calling this cell from someplace else, then I have to know what sheet it's from. But let me first do this. Let me say, okay, I'd like to have in here E1 show what's inside cell B1. And this is like the beginning of what's known as a formula. So among the concepts in here that I want to share, so you have sheet. Oh, by the way, the workbook. Workbook is this whole, you notice if we in the title says book, the whole Excel file is the workbook. And we'll go over absolute relative reference, absolute reference a little bit later, but formula. What is a formula? Formulas in Excel begin with the equal sign. An equal sign tells it that this is not just information that you put in. It's something that Excel has to do something, take an action. So that's what the formula is. And if you notice here, up here too, there's an equal sign in here. This is the portion of the Excel where you can see maybe the description, the actual formula. Because when I do an equal sign here, and I'll do it the easy way, I want to see in E1 whatever the cell B1 says. And this is where the cell name comes in. I click here, enter here, and if you notice, E1 displays the same thing that was showing in B1. And I can do this once again. Equals, I click on the cell B1, and if you notice here, it says equal sign B1, that's the formula, and you tell me, the result of what's there. Now, if I were to look at in the formula itself, and here, this is known as the formula bar. It actually tells you what's inside the formula. It's a little small. I don't know if you can see it or not, but or if you like double click on it, it tells me the formula. This is what the formula says, but the formula is calculated and displays as what's inside B1. If I were to change the formula to say equals to B1, same thing. So I can click on it and click on the cell or type in the cell name. So I want to see maybe the age here, B2. You tell me the age. Now I mentioned about the sheets. What if in sheet number 1, I wanted to see what was shown in sheet number assumptions, sheet assumptions, the person's name. I'll do this, equal sign. Go to the sheets that says assumptions, and I'll click on the cell. And if you notice, the name came out. Let me just make it bigger. But if you go to the formula bar, you'll see something. You see in front of the cell number, a cell named B1, there is this thing called assumptions and exclamation point. That signifies a sheet. So sheet assumptions B1. And this is how Excel knows where you are pointing to. Remember also, we talked about range. I want to talk about maybe get a range of something. And I'll tell you a little bit later on some of these things that I'm doing here. Let me give you a bunch of numbers. Let's see. This is like an age of different people. And I wanted to sum all of these together. Another formula, and this is a formula, but I'm using a special, I guess, a formula called to do mathematical operations. So this plus sign, this plus sign, this plus sign, this. 176. I can do a little bit more simpler, which is equal sign. And I use this thing called a function. Functions are preset formulas. Formulas that, like things like average or sum, that you enter a range or you enter certain cells in there as part of the formula, and you give you a result. Right? So I would select a range here of the numbers I want to sum. Close the parentheses, enter, and you give me the same result. So a formula like this, where I add each of them together, or a function, some function, which pretty much does the same thing. But one more thing again, the concept of the sheet. If I want to get the same function, sum function of the numbers from this other sheet, assumption sheet, I can just do this and you give me the result. So again, we covered the concepts about the cell, column, row, range, sheet, and the workbook, that concept, you don't have to use it too much because the workbook is the actual file itself. That's the workbook. And we talked about formula and function. I want to talk about these two more things, these last two things. These are very important things. And this is called relative reference and absolute reference. And I want to show it as an example of a multiplication table. I want to create a multiplication table in Excel. Multiplication table of, let's see, a 10 by 10 multiplication table. So we begin first with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, 10 by 10. And you know how multiplication tables it goes. It sums, multiplies these two. So 1 times 1. So you'll be, let's say 1. I can do something like this, 1 times 1. And by the way, multiplication in Excel, the multiplication sign is this in Excel. So 1 times 1 is 1. Equal again, 1 times 2 is 2. I could just manually enter in every single one, which would be very tedious, is a waste of time in Excel, or you can create a formula. So I can easily create a formula saying, hey, why don't I do this? Equal sign, 1 times 1. And that works great for this. And now I can, another thing about Excel is that you can actually copy the formulas. And you can use, copy, paste. Okay, seems to be working. Let's see, copy, paste again. And wait a minute, this is not working. Because 1 times 3 is not 6. And let's look into the formula to see what's wrong. If you notice here, the formula says, A2, which is here, times B1, which is here. So that's correct. Let's see over here. Oh, wait a minute, this is something already wrong because it's multiplying here B2 with C1. And let me just do this for you so I can see it better. So if you notice here, the wrong things are being multiplied. I should be multiplying C1 with A1. And the reason why the formulas are continuously changing is this thing called relative reference. When we talk about the cell here, let's talk about the cell here. Just not the formula, this cell, equal sign K1. The equal sign K1, K1 is the cell name. It's pointing to equal sign K1. But however, in Excel, whenever you copy something, when it moves, it has a tendency to change the formula. And the reason is that Excel is designed so that by default, it gives you a relative reference or change to the cell. So this is how Excel understands this formula. So equal sign, K1. Where is K1? K1 is one above this where the formula is located. So to Excel is this, one above. So every time you copy down, let's say copy this to, let's say, down here, it says 0, which means that there's no data there because it's pointing to just one above. So the way the Excel understands things is that by just simply entering a formula, it just understands that from wherever the formula is located, where the cell is referencing to, that's the relation. So that's the distance or the relation. And that's what we call relative reference. So it's referring to something relatively. Relatively means that it can change. So I don't want it to change. I want it to be not changing, non-changing constantly. So what do? I tell it to be absolute, do not change. The way to make it absolute is this. Dollar sign means absolute. When I put a dollar sign in front of the letter part of the name or the number part of the name, it makes this cell absolute. So I have this formula here. If I copy this all the way to here, guess what? The same formula copied. Dollar sign $K, dollar sign $1. It's the same formula here. I could copy this all the way to, I'm using a keyboard shortcut, Control C, Control V to paste. And the formula is the same formula because it's now absolute. The dollar sign in front of the name makes it absolute. But going back again to this multiplication table, I only want part of it to become, absolute reference. I want another part of it to become relative, to change when I move. So what do? I can make one formula that I can just copy to the right and copy to the bottom. That will be the perfect formula to make the multiplication table. And this is how I'll do it. Remember the first formula I began with, because Excel is designed so that if you can just make one perfect formula, you can copy and utilize it for everything else. So first thing, that formula that I created at the beginning, A2 times B1. So that's a good formula. However, I need to make a certain rules to it. So A2, in A2, going down from number 2 to 3, 4, 5, going down to 2, 3, 4, 5, that's fine. You can change. But I don't want the A to change to B and so on. So I want to put the dollar sign in front of the A. Okay. Now, referring to B1. B1 is fine to change from B to C to the D to the E column. That's fine. But I don't want it to go down from the row number 1 down. So I want to fix this in this way. So I change the formula this way. Now let's see what happens. I want to copy this and let me select this and I'll press enter. I'll paste it. So pretty much is equal to copy and paste. Again, same thing again. Let me copy and let me highlight the whole batch here and paste it. And if you notice, we have the multiplication table. Let me shade this so that it looks different. And that's what it is, the multiplication table. And if you notice here, the formula all the way here is pointing to the correct places. See K1, A11. Now, if you can use the concept of relative reference, absolute reference well, correctly, then you can actually do quite a lot of things in Excel. So these are some of the basic concepts in Excel, and we want to continuously talk about Excel going forward and having these lessons. Today's lesson might have been a little long because we covered many important key topics, but these are probably the most important topics to understand. My objective is that you can understand enough of Excel, the key 30% of the knowledge of Excel. You don't have to know 100%, but the 30% that really matters, like 90% of the time for work and everything else. So again, that's it. And hopefully this video is helpful for you. Thank you.